It was just past midnight when I woke to the sound of muffled voices downstairs. I thought it was the TV, until I heard my mom crying. Curious, and a little scared, I crept out of bed and peeked through the stair rails. What I saw that night still haunts me. My uncle. My mother. A conversation I wasn't meant to hear. And then, something else. Something I still can't fully explain, but I knew, deep in my gut, it was wrong. The next morning, I told her everything I'd seen. Her face went pale, and for the first time in my life, my mom looked at me like I was dangerous. She grabbed my hand so hard it hurt. "You will not repeat that," she hissed. "Ever. To anyone." I was only 10, but I understood exactly what she meant. She wasn't protecting me, she was protecting him. I tried to forget. I tried to pretend. But every time he walked into our home like nothing happened, something in me screamed. One day, I couldn't hold it anymore. I opened my mouth, and the truth spilled out in the most public way possible. What happened next? No one in town saw coming. The days that followed that night were a blur of forced smiles, heavy silences, and my mother's eyes watching me like a hawk. She made sure I never had a moment alone with anyone, not at school, not even at home. She triple-checked every homework assignment, every phone call, and even started walking me to and from the bus stop like I was 5 years old again. I wanted to believe she was just being protective, but I knew the truth. She was guarding a secret, the same one she warned me to bury. I stopped sleeping well, and the nightmares started, replays of what I'd seen that night. The muffled whispers, the tears on her face, the way Uncle Ray had grabbed her wrist and said, "You said this would never get out." I couldn't unsee it. And even worse, I couldn't unfeel it. Every time Uncle Ray came around, which, terrifyingly, was often, I'd feel my throat tighten and my palms go cold. My mother would pretend everything was normal, setting an extra plate for him, laughing too loudly at his bad jokes, and looking at me with eyes that said, "Don't you dare." I started keeping a journal, hidden inside the lining of my old toy box. Every feeling, every memory, every lie. I scribbled it all down because it was the only place I could tell the truth. And one afternoon, I did something stupid. I brought that journal to school. I didn't mean to show it to anyone, but my best friend MIA saw me writing in it during lunch. "What are you always scribbling in there?" she asked, half teasing. I panicked, shoved it into my bag, and muttered something about story ideas. But she didn't drop it. May had always been nosy, but in a kind way. She knew me too well, and she could tell something was wrong. That afternoon, she walked me home like usual, only this time, she stopped right before we got to my driveway. "Is it your uncle?" she asked, out of nowhere. "He gives me the creeps." My heart dropped. I looked at her, stunned. "Why would you say that?" I asked. "Because I've seen how you shrink around him. It's like your whole body folds in on itself. That's not normal, Anna." That night, I couldn't sleep again. I kept replaying her words. "It's like your whole body folds in on itself." She wasn't wrong. I had become smaller, quieter, less of myself. But I didn't know how to explain what I'd seen. How do you tell someone that your mother, the one person who's supposed to protect you, told you to forget it ever happened? That she made you promise to keep quiet, not because it wasn't real, but because it was? A week passed. Then too. I started pulling away from MIA. I didn't want to lie to her, but I also didn't want to drag her into my mess. Meanwhile, Uncle Ray kept coming around, laughing like nothing ever happened. And my mother kept pretending we were all just one big happy family. One Saturday afternoon, while Mom was out running errands and Ray was supposed to be helping with yard work, I caught him going through my toy box. My stomach dropped. My journal. I sprinted into the room just in time to snatch it from his hands. He stared at me for a moment, something dangerous flickering in his eyes. "You writing stories about me, Anna?" he asked, voice low. "Because that wouldn't be smart." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just clutched the notebook to my chest and backed away until I was out the door. That night, I didn't eat dinner. I sat in my room with the lights off, watching the shadows on the wall and waiting for something to break. And it did, just not the way I expected. The next morning at school, Mia confronted me. She had found a page from my journal. It must have fallen out that day I brought it to school. And she had read it. My blood ran cold, and I felt exposed in a way I never had before. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why are you going through this alone?" I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. But something shifted in me that moment. Mia didn't look at me with pity. She looked at me with fire in her eyes, like she was ready to go to war with me. "We have to do something," she said. "You can't keep carrying this." I shook my head. "My mom said." "Your mom is protecting him," she interrupted. "Not you. That's not okay, Anna." I went home that day feeling a storm building inside me. And for the first time, I didn't try to hide it. I started asking questions. I started writing more openly in my journal, no longer hiding behind metaphors or vague lines. I wrote about the night I saw Ray and my mom, about the threats, about the bruises on her arms that she claimed were from gardening. I wrote about the coldness in her voice when she told me to stay silent. And then, I did something I never thought I'd do. I told Mia I wanted to share my story. Not just with her. With everyone. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Once it's out there, it's out there." I was terrified. But I nodded. Because silence wasn't safety. It was a cage. And I was done living inside it. Mia and I met at the edge of the park after school the next day, just like we planned, somewhere out of sight, where no one from town would randomly stroll by and hear us talking. I could barely breathe from the weight of what we were about to do. I had spent years holding my truth like a fragile secret, and now it was about to step into the light. Mia opened her backpack and pulled out a small black camera. "We record everything," she said. "You tell the story your way. Start wherever you want. We can always edit." My hands trembled as I took the camera from her. "What if nobody believes me?" I asked. "What if people say I'm just making it up?" Mia looked me straight in the eye. "Then we show them the proof." Her words stirred something in me, a tiny flicker of courage, barely enough to keep the fear from swallowing me whole. That night, in my bedroom, I recorded the first video. No makeup. No edits. Just me, sitting on the edge of my bed with a journal in my lap and a crack in my voice. I told the story from the beginning, how I had seen Uncle Ray grab my mother's wrist, how she begged him to lower his voice, how she later told me that grown-ups argue sometimes and that what I saw wasn't real. Mia helped piece it all together, transforming my trauma into something powerful. We called it the Unquiet series. It was raw, shaky, unfiltered, and people responded. Survivors, her fingers shook when she poured orange juice the next morning, how her eyes darted to me when Ray stopped by unexpectedly, and how she always forced a smile. And I told them about the journal, the one she never found, the one that held every truth I had never dared to say out loud, until now. I posted the video anonymously at first, under a fake name. Small Town Secrets, I called the channel. Mia helped me make sure my identity was protected. She created the email account, blurred my face slightly, and monitored the comments. But within 48 hours, the video had thousands of views. The town wasn't as silent as I'd imagined. People started sharing their own stories in the comments, some vague, some painfully specific. And while most of them didn't know who I was, a few people did. A week after I posted the video, I overheard two girls whispering about it in the bathroom at school. "It's gotta be that girl. What's her name? Anna something? Her uncle gives me the creeps." I froze in the stall, heart pounding. Part of me wanted to cry. The other part wanted to scream. That afternoon, when I got home, my mother was already waiting in the living room. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, and her hands were clenched around a mug that had long gone cold. "What did you do?" she asked quietly. I didn't lie. I told her everything. Her face paled, and her eyes widened with something that wasn't just anger, it was fear. Real fear. You have no idea what you've started, she whispered. You're putting us in danger. I stood my ground. You said to keep quiet. I did. 4 years. But I won't protect him anymore. My mom covered her face with her hands and sobbed. And for a brief moment, I felt something I didn't expect. Pity. Maybe even empathy. But it didn't change the facts. She had chosen silence. She had chosen him. I chose truth. Over the next few days, more videos followed. May help me put together clips using journal excerpts, recorded voiceovers, even photos of bruises on my mom's arms, ones she claimed were from tripping, bumping into a door, or gardening accidents in the dark. The views doubled, then tripled, then exploded. Emails poured in. Anonymous messages. Women from neighboring towns shared eerily similar stories. And the more the truth surfaced, the more I started to feel seen. But not everyone was supportive. Some adults at school whispered that I was making it up for attention. A teacher told me I seemed troubled and referred me to the school counselor. My mother stopped speaking to me entirely. Uncle Ray hadn't shown up since the video started, but that only made me more paranoid. Where was he? What was he planning? Then came the knock on the door. It was late, past 9:30 p.m., and MIA and I were editing the next upload in my room. My mom opened it, and from the top of the stairs, I heard a voice I hadn't heard in weeks. Uncle Ray. Where is she? He asked. We need to talk. Alone. My heart froze. MIA pulled the laptop toward her and quickly shut it. He can't be here, she whispered. Call someone. Anyone. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 with shaking hands, barely able to breathe as I gave them our address. Downstairs, I heard muffled arguing. My mother's voice, tight and panicked. Ray's voice, low and forceful. Then, silence. I crept halfway down the stairs, phone still in my hand, and that's when I saw him. Standing in the middle of the living room, staring straight up at me. His smile was cold. There's my little storyteller, he said, voice full of venom. You've made quite a mess. My mom stepped in front of him, arms spread like she was shielding me. You need to leave, Ray. Right now. But he wasn't listening. You think this is going to end well for you, he hissed. People forget. But I don't. The sound of sirens cut through the tension. Flashing red and blue lights spilled across the windows. Ray cursed under his breath and backed away. This isn't over, he growled, and then he slipped out the back door just as 2 officers came pounding through the front. The house felt like it exhaled all at once. I couldn't stop shaking. My mom collapsed onto the couch, sobbing, her face in her hands. And for the first time in my life, I didn't go to comfort her. Because now I knew, her silence had almost broken me. And I wasn't going to let her break me again. The police presence around our house didn't last long. Within a couple of hours, the officers took statements, glanced briefly at the video footage MIA had recorded on her phone, and left with vague reassurances. We'll file a report. We'll keep a patrol car nearby. Stay inside for the night. But none of their words made me feel safer. Not really. Uncle Ray had walked out that door before they arrived, calm, untouched, and smug. And I knew he wasn't the kind of man to go quietly. For the next few days, I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder. I slept with a journal clutched against my chest. My mother didn't speak unless she absolutely had to, walking around the house like a ghost, her face pale, her eyes empty. I wanted to believe she was coming to terms with what she had allowed all these years, but in truth, I didn't know what to believe anymore. MIA stayed with me most nights. Her parents were cautious about the whole situation, but after they watched the videos and saw how deeply I was caught in this storm, they supported her staying close. We set up extra locks on the windows. MIA taught me how to wedge a chair under my doorknob just in case. And still, every creak in the floorboards made me flinch. That Sunday, 3 days after the police visit, everything escalated. I woke up to the sound of shattering glass. Not just a bottle, not just a window, but something heavy, something deliberate. MIA jolted awake beside me. We rushed downstairs to find the living room window smashed open. A brick lay on the floor, wrapped in torn notebook paper. My notebook paper. Someone had ripped pages out of my journal, the original one I thought had been safe, and written over them in bold black marker, "Liar. You'll regret this." My hands went numb. MI took the note and snapped pictures of it while I tried to breathe, tried to process how deeply Ray had gotten into our lives. I had been careful. I had been anonymous. But now the mask was off. And he wanted me to know he was watching. We took the brick, the note, and the journal remnants straight to the police. This time, the officers took us a little more seriously. They assigned someone to patrol near our house. Still, no one made an arrest. No one brought Ray in. "He's not stupid," one of them told my mom. "He'll keep his distance now that we're involved." But I knew better. Ray wasn't done. He didn't like losing control. And now that I had taken the story to the town, he was unraveling. I doubled down on the videos. I released more details, conversations I remembered, physical proof I had hidden, screenshots of texts my mother had once sent to her sister that hinted at Ray's abuse. MI helped piece it all together, transforming my trauma into something powerful. We called it the Unquiet series. It was raw, shaky, unfiltered, and people responded. Survivors, teachers, community members who had quietly suspected things about Ray but never said them aloud. Suddenly, my anonymous channel was no longer a whisper, it was a megaphone. But with that power came danger. One night, after we uploaded part 3 of the series, my mom came into my room with tears in her eyes. "You don't understand what you're doing," she whispered. "He has connections. People who owe him. People who protect him." She looked so defeated, so worn down by years of secrets, that for a brief moment, I almost believed I was wrong for speaking out. But then I remembered the way Ray had looked at me the night he came back. Like I was prey. And I realized, I wasn't the one who should be afraid anymore. He should. That same week, we planned something bold. MIA and I were invited to speak anonymously at the school board meeting. A teacher had reached out privately after watching the series and said, "You need to tell this story in person. People need to feel it." My mom begged me not to go. "It's too dangerous," she said. "They'll know it's you." I looked at her, heart thudding in my chest, and said, "Then they'll finally know the truth." The night of the meeting, I stood behind the podium in the town hall gym, hood over my head, microphone shaking in my hand. The room was packed, neighbors, teachers, students, even local press. I started with a simple sentence, "My name doesn't matter. My story does." And then I told it. I spoke about growing up in silence, watching my mother smile through bruises, learning at a young age what fear felt like in your bones. I spoke about the night I overheard the argument, the threats, the violence, the moment I realized secrets were more powerful than truth in our family. And I told them how I had chosen not to be silent anymore. I didn't name Ray. I didn't have to. The room knew. The whispers had already started. As I walked off stage, I caught eyes with someone I hadn't expected to see, Ray's ex-wife. She looked straight at me, nodded slowly, and mouthed, "Thank you." And just like that, I knew this was bigger than just me. It always had been. The next day, the local paper printed a story titled, "Brave Teen Story Sparks Town Reckoning." My identity wasn't revealed, but the damage to Ray's reputation was done. People started distancing themselves from him. Stores refused his business. One of the companies he consulted for publicly cut ties. And finally, the police came back with a warrant. They had matched fingerprints from the brick. They had enough from the past to bring him in for questioning. It wasn't justice yet. But it was a beginning. And as I stood in the doorway watching them take him away in handcuffs, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, relief. I looked at my mom, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, and whispered, "You don't have to protect him anymore." She didn't answer. But for the first time, She didn't look away either. The days that followed Ray's arrest felt like the silence after a violent storm, quiet, but unsettling, as if something still lingered in the air. Though he was behind bars awaiting a court hearing, the damage he had left behind clung to us like ash. My mom moved around the house in a daze, like her body had been emptied of everything but guilt. She hadn't said much since the arrest, only small things like pass the salt or lock the door. I didn't push her. She had chosen silence for years. If she wanted to break it now, she'd have to do it on her own. Meanwhile, the YouTube channel continued gaining momentum. People were now sharing not just comments but full testimonies. Anonymous letters arrived in our mailbox from women in town, from neighboring counties, some from states away. Each one echoed the same haunting theme: I didn't know I was allowed to speak up. You showed me I was. The response overwhelmed me. I'd started this as a terrified girl whispering her truth into a camera, and now I was being called brave, even heroic. But beneath the surface, I was still shaken. Because part of me knew this wasn't over. One night, about a week before Ray's first court appearance, my mom woke me up just past 1 a.m. Her face was pale and damp with sweat, and her eyes were wide with panic. I need to tell you something, she whispered. I sat up immediately, heart pounding. She held out her trembling hand, and in it was a small, worn envelope. I kept this hidden for years, she said. It's from your father. My father, the man I barely remembered, who had disappeared when I was 5. She had always told me he left us. But now, as I opened the letter with shaking hands, the truth unraveled with every sentence. He hadn't left us. He'd tried to protect us. The letter was dated over 10 years ago. My father had written about Ray's influence, how he feared for our safety, how he was going to expose something. He never wrote what, but then he ended the letter with, "If anything happens to me, it's not an accident." I looked up at my mother, breathless. What did happen to him? Her lips quivered. They said it was a car accident. But now, I don't know anymore. My mind reeled. Was Ray responsible for my father's death? Was that the secret Mom had buried all these years, afraid of what would happen if she dared to speak? Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice sharper than I meant. She started crying, clutching the envelope like it was the last piece of her broken soul. Because I was scared. And because he told me if I ever talked, I'd be next. The weight of that fear, passed down like a curse, settled over me like a second skin. But it also filled me with resolve. I couldn't let this go now, not when the truth was right there in my hands. And I scanned the letter and uploaded it as part 4 of the Unquiet series, explaining everything, my dad's warnings, the timeline, the way he vanished. That video didn't just go viral, it exploded. News outlets picked it up. Local reporters camped outside our house. Lawyers contacted us, and suddenly the case wasn't just about domestic abuse, it was about a possible murder cover-up. Pressure mounted on the police. Within days, they reopened the investigation into my father's death. And that's when the threats started again. This time, not from Ray, but from strangers. Private messages flooded the inbox of our channel. Take the videos down. You're playing with fire. You don't know who you're messing with. At first, I thought they were just trolls, angry viewers who didn't want to believe their favorite uncle or neighbor could be a monster. But then, one night, someone slashed our car tires. Left a dead bird on the porch. The police tried to reassure us again. We're investigating, they said. Be cautious. But I didn't feel safe anymore, not even in my own skin. And that's when MIA suggested we leave town, just for a few days. Lay low, she said. Let things calm down. We can stay with my cousin in the city. My mom agreed, for once. We packed quickly and left before sunrise the next day. But even as we drove, even as the town disappeared in the rearview mirror, I couldn't shake the dread curling in my chest. That night, while staying at Mia's cousin's apartment, I received a message from a burner email. No subject. Just a single sentence. Run all you want. He wasn't working alone. I stared at the screen, hands frozen. The truth was bigger than I imagined. It wasn't just about Ray. It never was. That final puzzle piece locked into place, I realized why my mom had been so terrified for so long. Ray had been protected, covered, enabled by people we probably passed every day. The mayor, a local cop, someone in the DA's office. Suddenly, it all felt connected. The silence, the threats, the way my father had accidentally died after trying to expose something. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. But this time, I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to hide. I took Mia's hand and looked her in the eye. "We finish what we started," I said. "No more secrets. No more hiding. Not for me, not for my dad." She nodded, her expression hardening. And with that, we planned our final video, a live stream. No edits. No filters. Just the whole story, in our voices, told from beginning to end. Let the world watch. Let them decide. Because if no one else was going to hold these people accountable, we would. The live stream was scheduled for 8 p.m. sharp. As the time drew closer, I sat in front of the camera, heart hammering in my chest, every second stretching into an eternity. Miss sat beside me, her hand resting over mine, grounding me as my nerves frayed with the weight of what we were about to do. My mom stood just outside of the frame, watching silently, her eyes red but determined. She hadn't left my side since we left town, and even now, despite everything, she was still afraid, but this time, she stood with me. The screen blinked live, and within seconds, thousands of viewers flooded the channel. We hadn't announced what we'd share, we didn't need to. People knew something big was coming. I took a breath and began. I spoke about the bruises first. About how I'd hidden them. About how I'd convinced myself they weren't real, because admitting the truth would mean destroying everything I thought was safe. I told them about my mom's silence, the kind of silence that's taught, not chosen. Then Amir stepped in, reading parts of my father's letter aloud, the words heavy and raw. She showed scanned copies on screen, undeniable proof. Viewers flooded the chat with crying emojis, gasps, disbelief, and fury. But we didn't stop there. We exposed the threats. The slashed tires. The bird. The anonymous messages that warned us to shut up. And then we dropped the final piece, screenshots of emails, one traced back to a local sheriff's deputy. He'd threatened us anonymously, tried to intimidate us into silence. And suddenly, what had begun as a personal story was now a scandal spiraling into every corner of our town's power structure. We ended the stream with my voice shaking but firm. If anything happens to us after this video, if we vanish, if there's another accident, you'll know who did it. And now so will the world. The video hit 1.5 million views in 12 hours. It was covered by national news outlets, shared by celebrities, and dissected in podcasts. The town we'd grown up in, the one that told us to keep our heads down and our voices low, was now under the brightest spotlight imaginable. And the fallout came fast. The deputy from the email was placed on administrative leave. Investigators reopened not just my father's case, but a separate report from 15 years ago. A different girl, a different story, eerily similar patterns. Ray, still in custody, suddenly requested to speak to federal agents. Rumors swirled that he was ready to trade names. To save himself. My mom and I were placed under protection, not just by the local force, but by an external task team sent in once it became clear that the corruption was deeper than anyone expected. Reporters camped outside Mia's cousin's apartment. My inbox filled with messages from victims who finally felt seen. But none of it made me feel victorious. Not yet. The fear didn't vanish overnight. Every knock on the door still made me flinch. Every phone ring felt like a warning. But slowly, something shifted. My mom started leaving her bedroom more. She helped make breakfast. She smiled at MIA. And one evening, she asked to go with me on a walk. We walked in silence for a long time before she finally spoke. "I watched the whole video," she said. All of it. You're incredible. Her voice cracked. I should have protected you. I should have protected your father. Instead, I stopped her there, taking her hand. You were surviving. I get it now. And I did. Her silence wasn't betrayal, it was survival, shaped by fear and trauma she hadn't asked for. Healing didn't look like loud declarations or revenge. It looked like two women walking under streetlights, no longer afraid to speak the truth. A few days later, we were called to attend the first hearing. It wasn't the trial, that was months away, but it was enough. I wanted to look Ray in the face one more time. I needed to. He walked in wearing orange, shackled, his face gaunt, eyes dimmer than I remembered. When he turned and saw me in the back row, something flickered in his gaze. Anger? Shame? I couldn't tell. But I didn't look away. I wanted him to see what he didn't destroy. I wanted him to see what grew in the ruins he left behind. Strength. Voice. Truth. And then, as if it couldn't be more poetic, the judge denied his bail. Ray would stay behind bars. The courtroom buzzed. My mom gripped my hand. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I exhaled. But perhaps the most surreal moment came a week later, when a woman knocked on our apartment door. She was older, maybe late 50s, with a folder clutched tightly to her chest. Her name was Cynthia, and she had been a social worker in our town years ago, until she was quietly fired after opening a case involving Ray. She handed over the folder, tears in her eyes. They buried this. But I saved copies. I've been waiting for someone brave enough to take it all the way. Inside were records, interviews, complaints, even a photograph of my dad taken 2 weeks before his death. He looked scared, but determined. Everything was there. Evidence that Ray had been protected, that my dad had tried to fight, that no one listened. Until now. Until me. Until us. As we closed the door behind Cynthia, I realized something. This wasn't just a story of trauma. It wasn't even just a story of justice. It was a story about legacy. About how silence can echo for generations, or how truth can finally break the chain. That night, I posted one more update video. Short, raw, real. We were never supposed to win, I said. But we spoke anyway. And because we did, the silence broke. Maybe, now, it won't come back. The days after Ray's bail was denied blurred into a whirlwind of interviews, subpoenas, therapy sessions, and long, quiet nights where the air didn't feel so heavy anymore. The media frenzy had quieted slightly, but the investigation only deepened. My phone buzzed daily with calls from reporters, lawyers, victims, and strangers thanking me for speaking out, some with stories of their own, some with apologies for never seeing the truth. But the moment that solidified everything didn't come from a headline or a courtroom. It came one morning, almost a month later, when I found my mom sitting on the edge of my bed, holding something in her hands. It was a box, a small, dented metal one with peeling paint. I found this behind the wardrobe, she whispered, her voice cracking. It's your father's. Inside were letters, journals, clippings, pieces of a puzzle he'd tried so hard to put together before they silenced him. My fingers shook as I unfolded one page, written in my dad's careful scrawl. If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident. It will be because I got too close. I pressed the paper to my chest and cried, not just for him, but for the years lost in silence. That day, I called MIA and told her we were going to finish what he started. We went to the state attorney's office, armed with the box. The reaction was immediate. Subpoenas flew out within 24 hours, several local officials were put under review, and for the first time, people were listening because the evidence wasn't just emotional, it was factual, paper trail solid. More importantly, it wasn't just my story anymore. It was my father's. And theirs. That same week, I was asked to speak at a town hall organized by a new justice reform group. It was held in the community center, an ordinary place that suddenly felt like a battleground for truth. I stood on stage with MIA beside me, looking out at rows of faces, some familiar, some not, but all of them changed. I told them everything. The bruises, the fear, the silence, the choice to finally speak. When I finished, there was no applause at first, just a stillness so heavy, I thought I'd failed. But then someone stood up. An elderly woman in the back row. My granddaughter went through the same thing, she said. And no one believed her either. But now I do. One by one, more people stood. Not clapping, just standing. In solidarity. In understanding. It was the loudest silence I'd ever heard. Later that evening, I received a message from the school board. They were reopening the hiring process for their district's mental health coordinator. They wanted someone with first-hand experience. Someone who knew what it meant to break cycles. They wanted me. I almost said no. But Ame looked at me and said, "You're not just surviving anymore. You're building." So I said yes. A small yes, maybe, but a powerful one. Meanwhile, Ray's trial date was set. The evidence against him had stacked too high to ignore, and more victims had come forward, emboldened by our story. A class action lawsuit was quietly building against those who protected him, judges, deputies, and even a few school officials. I didn't want revenge. I wanted reckoning. Justice didn't have to roar. Sometimes it whispered, "You're not invisible anymore." One day, while walking through town with MIA and my mom, I passed by a bakery where the windows had once displayed congratulatory cakes for every mayoral re-election, cakes that always had Ray's name on them. That day, they had a new display. To the girl who spoke. Thank you. I stopped in my tracks. The woman behind the counter waved shyly. I used to be scared, she said. But now, I tell your story to every customer who asks. My mom cried beside me. Not the broken kind of cry, the healing kind. We went inside and bought 3 cupcakes. Sat at a corner table. Laughed. It was the first time in years we ate in public without feeling watched. Without flinching at every door chime. Back home that night, I lit a candle by my father's old photograph. I told him everything. I told him I missed him. That I was angry he never got to see this. That I hoped wherever he was, he knew I finished what he couldn't. And then I promised him something. I'd never let silence win again. Not in this house. Not in this town. Not in me. MIA moved in shortly after. Her presence was a balm, a steady rhythm that reminded me life didn't stop after survival. It evolved. We redecorated the apartment with soft colors, fresh plants, and books that weren't just for escape anymore, they were for growth. My mom began seeing a counselor regularly. She started writing again, journals, poems, even a letter to my father she let me read. I didn't know how to protect you, she wrote. But I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know I'm trying now. That was enough for me. One afternoon, as we packed up boxes to finally move out of the apartment, I found something I'd written in high school, a crumpled poem buried beneath old sketchbooks. Truth is a wild thing, fragile but free, you can't cage her with silence, she always finds a key. I smiled. Even back then, my younger self had known. She had just been waiting for me to catch up. As we closed the door to that chapter, literally and figuratively, I took one last look at the room where everything began. Where secrets were kept, where pain lingered in corners, but where truth had finally bloomed. And I whispered to the empty space, "We're not hiding anymore." And just like that, the past no longer owned me. Sometimes, stories don't end with a final court verdict or a headline. Sometimes, they don't end at all. They shift. They evolve. They become the foundation on which something better is built. That's what happened to mine. After everything, Ray's sentencing, the town's reckoning, and the emotional excavation of years of silence, I didn't find closure in a dramatic twist or some grand apology. I found it in the quiet. In the morning light that no longer felt threatening. In laughter that didn't sound like survival. In the way I could finally meet my own reflection without flinching. The past didn't disappear. It never does. But it stopped controlling the script. I took the pen back. Ray was sentenced to 36 years in prison without parole. It wasn't enough to undo what he did, but it was enough to send a message to others like him and to the people who ignored the signs. There would be no more hiding behind charm and fake smiles. No more brushing abuse under the rug because it was too uncomfortable to confront. And as more victims stepped forward, I realized I was never alone. I never had been. I just couldn't hear their voices over the sound of my own silence. Now, we were louder than ever. My mom eventually sold our old house, the one where the lies were kept behind perfect curtains and staged holiday photos. She said it felt like shaking off a ghost. She moved into a small cottage by the lake where she paints now. Mostly landscapes, but sometimes she paints from memory. I visited one weekend and found a canvas of a girl on a swing, golden light filtering through autumn leaves. I asked her who it was. She just smiled and said, "You. Before the world got to you." I cried for a long time that day, but it wasn't grief, it was gratitude. We were both healing, in our own uneven, beautiful ways. I continued working with the Justice Group, eventually helping write legislation that required trauma training for public servants in our county. I stood in front of lawmakers who once rolled their eyes at emotional stories, and I gave them facts wrapped in truth. And they listened. Some reluctantly. But they listened. That, too, felt like justice. MIA, and I stayed close. She called me her battle sister, and in a way, we were. We went through the war and came out scarred, but standing. On the one-year anniversary of the trial, we sat on the courthouse steps where it all began and read letters from survivors who'd written to us since. Some were heartbreaking. Some were hopeful. All were powerful. We cried. We laughed. We reminded each other that the story didn't end in that courtroom. It began there. People sometimes ask me if I regret what I did, if I regret exposing the truth, even though it cost us relationships, peace, even safety for a while. My answer is always the same. Silence was never safety. It was only a slower kind of death. Speaking out didn't destroy my life. It saved it. It gave me back everything I'd buried to protect someone who never deserved my silence in the first place. So here's what I know now. Truth is terrifying. It's raw and messy and inconvenient. But it's also power. And once spoken, it can't be buried again. That's the legacy I carry, not just for me, but for my father, for the children who were never believed, and for the girl I used to be. The one who once stood in a dark room, gripping fear like armor, believing no one would ever hear her. Now they hear me. And I will never stop speaking.